Welcome. In this video, we're going to continue our process of creating a Quarto website. So we should have created a basic Quarto website if you've been following along this document or the previous videos. And what we want to do next is take the files that built the website locally on our computer, push them into the GitHub repo, and then publish them through GitHub pages in the GitHub server. So at this point, you should have created a demo site after following the previous videos, but that demo site is just living locally on my computer. So there are a bunch of files that went into building that. So we're going to push this into GitHub. And in the end, we're going to create a website that has the address of that website is going to be something like your username.github.io/ and then the name of the repo where you have the file. So in our case, the repository, or in my case, the repository is called demo site that I created earlier. If you set this up so that you were creating just a main homepage for your GitHub account, then you don't have any / and name. You would just have your username.github.io. So below are just some links of some examples of projects you may have seen if you're a student at CU Denver and some of our other math, data science, and stat courses. So there are a series of open source materials, OER, that means open education resources that we created for some of our classes. And some of those materials were created using Quarto. Here are 3 textbooks as examples. So here's a textbook in statistical theory that I created using Quarto documents that I published in GitHub pages. You can see the GitHub address. And this has all of these sections. And there's, R code, and students can click on links to open things in Colab and then interact with those documents. Here's a textbook on differential equations that I wrote using Quarto, but in this case, I was doing a very similar process, but with Jupyter notebooks. So these are actually IPYNB files that I kind of knit together to create a textbook. And this textbook in differential equations is using Python. Here's a link to a textbook that Joshua French, another professor in our department that you might be familiar with, he wrote using Quarto files. And this is the textbook for applied regression analysis. So that is Math 4387 at CU Denver. So it's pretty robust, the type of websites that you can create. It's particularly nice. Quarto documents and Jupyter notebooks are really nice for creating these technical documents where you've got math equations and text and you want to execute code. It might not be the nicest way to set up really snazzy looking websites, but we'll talk about how we can use Quarto documents to create at least some level of snazzy website, as well as weaving in these technical documents. And so the first step in creating a website like this is to take the files that we have created in RStudio or Posit Cloud and push these files into the remote repository in GitHub. So there are different ways to do this. There are more than 2 ways to do this. So lots of people have kind of developed their own workflow with Git and GitHub. So other people might do things other ways. So I'm just going to present the way that I think is convenient to do, and just know that this is just my workflow and you can experiment and maybe you'll find a workflow that you like better. But the 2 ways that I'll talk about pushing changes into GitHub is that we can use a terminal commands or we can use the GitHub website. So using terminal commands is slightly more advanced. It's not all that advanced, but maybe slightly more advanced. And it's way more convenient, I think, to collaborate and set up your workflow using a terminal. Or You can also do like a click and drag method into GitHub. That certainly works. It's much, much easier, or at least somewhat easier, but I do think it's less convenient. And I think the loss in convenience, personally, I think is more than the level of difficulty that you might have. If you were working in Posit Cloud, then directly syncing your files with GitHub through the terminal is possible. It's a little bit, it requires configuring things a little bit. There's a link here to see that documentation. I am not going to talk about that. So if you're using Posit Cloud and you don't want to link it directly with GitHub, then you'll want to use the click and drag technique. And I'll talk about that in a separate video. So in the next video, I'm going to go through how you can the workflow of how you can make changes on your local computer to files, push them into GitHub, and then your website's going to be updated in GitHub.